Howdy, everybody. Welcome to Highly Questionable Marketing, and we're going to just dive right in. I know, well, everybody probably knows we're hot on this revenue topic, but man, it just keeps coming up and it keeps getting stronger and stronger, and the drumbeat is louder and louder. And Nick Bennett came out. And again, I actually like a lot of stuff he posts. I think it's really good, but I just want to talk not necessarily about him, but this idea of this whole revenue focus. And he had a post a few weeks ago about these 4 lightning bolts for a new community they've started called the revenue era. And there's 4 pillars in the revenue era, which is field and event, demand, growth, and ABM. 4 pillars of the revenue era is community, content, tools, and templates. And the 4 core values, he didn't get into that, but he says he's going to get into that in another post. And holy shit, look, this just shows everything that's wrong with marketing. And I really hate to say this, but here's how I actually feel what the hell just happened and what I just read. You got a few guys or girls that got in a room and they just cobbled together a bunch of best practices and said, here we are, here's the revenue era, look at these 4 lightning bolts. And I just don't even know what we're talking about here. None of that really aligns to anything revenue era. It's just a bunch of best practices packaged up with, I think what you said in a few podcasts ago, Jurgen, right? Named something so it sounds cool, but there's nothing new there. There's nothing earth shattering. It's kind of what I always say. It's just chasing shiny objects and best practices. That's a lot of tactics is what I read in that. And I just think it's going to leave a lot of marketers in a very hard spot. Who wants to come at me? Anybody? Or are we all going to agree on this?
I think we're all going to agree here. I mean, I think with the revenue era and what he calls out here, it just blatantly ignores like message to market fit or a lot of those basics that a lot of marketing doesn't get right? People, define, brand messaging, then they try to scale it without even testing whether it works. And, you're just kind of scaling this mediocre marketing message or marketing content. And I don't see anything here about going back to the customer and doing a lot of discovery or actually doing things that are creative and inventive. Or I guess I see content under a pillar of revenue error, but it's alongside tools and templates. It just doesn't seem strong enough. I just think it just seems buzzwordy to me. And to me, sitting in many marketing organizations, I just noticed that they're just not doing things correctly. They want pipeline, but a lot of people don't want to go start back at basics and, think about changes, think about that brand story, that brand narrative, and then reflect that into content and then scale demand gen, right? A lot of people just want demand gen. And I think that's what I'm seeing here too, is that people want to just go create pipeline, use it as a sales tool, but that kind of ignores what marketing's even there for in the first place.
I think about when I first heard the phrase or term revenue era, and I don't know if anybody remembers when they first heard it. For me, it was when Drift repositioned, and it was sort of early-ish in COVID, and it was like, hey, DC came back out and said, hey, we're now in the revenue era, if I am remembering it correctly, and it resonated with me at that point, right? Because what I took from that was that, look, companies now are facing a greater pressure than ever to generate revenue and to generate revenue quickly. A lot of companies felt that, have felt that over the past couple of years. And so for me, that's where it comes from. Maybe it comes from somewhere else, but for me, that's my initial reference point. And then I've seen, marketers, we've kind of ran with it in a few different ways. And now we're talking about it almost as if it's a, framework of sorts, that it sort of represents an entirely new approach to marketing, which of course is just like the same shit, just packaged up a little bit differently. And I can understand where you guys are coming from on that. But I think as much as it kind of resonated with me when I first heard it, and being a DC guy, I'm probably biased there, but I just think about it more and more as yes, revenue is the ultimate goal, but an era based on a goal that has always been there, Like, what's different really, right? Like, when was revenue not the goal?
Well,
And so what does it mean? Like, I am actually trying to understand better what's going on here.
yeah. I mean, I don't know that revenue was always the goal, honestly. I mean, I've been in marketing, I think, now for 11 years, and I remember a time when marketing did not have clear revenue KPIs. And yes, of course, the whole company might have had a KPI, but marketing didn't, like, there was no funnel. Like, I remember a time when it wasn't MQLs and meetings and funnels. I remember when it was a time when it was brand and awareness and impressions and clicks, right? It was how do we get the most people to see things? And that was a metric. So I don't argue with the title revenue era. I guess when I look at this post, like I see nothing about operations. I see nothing about message market fit. I mean, I feel like, I'm not going to argue against revenue era. I do think that at this point, that is what we're, going to be measured against. It will be revenue. It will be pipeline. That's just the reality, especially of B2B marketing right now. I don't argue with it. I guess my thought is this post really kind of leaves some really open gaps here in what it actually takes to be somebody who does really excellent marketing and drives demand and then revenue. So I guess that's kind of my take here.
Yeah, I would
Yeah,
say if I'm sorry, Jay, if I'm Nick, right, and I'm in this conversation, I would probably say something like, look, like just saying revenue era and presenting these like values and whatever doesn't mean that this is now all of marketing. So naturally there will be some gaps. And I think that's fair, right? I don't think
Yeah.
anybody who's bringing any new-ish thinking to the marketing table about how we can approach things is saying this now replaces everything else, right? Like if you said that, you'd be an absolute fool, and I certainly don't think Nick is.
No.
So, but yes, there are some gaps. For me, though, the bigger thing is just that it feels very much like the same as what people have been doing. It doesn't seem the revenue era and constructing something underneath that doesn't seem particularly innovative to me. Like it doesn't seem like a new thing. And I'm not saying
it's
that to say,
definitely
oh,
not at this point. No.
yeah, I'm really not saying that to say like, oh well, I've been on this shit for like it's not that. It's just like I don't see really the newness here. But even more importantly, I just don't think this is the right path. I don't think this is how we as marketers will ultimately win. I don't think this is the right focus. As I've said before, I think this like massive pendulum swing towards revenue is going to leave a lot of marketers screwing up and messing up, becoming these one-dimensional creatures and teams that aren't going to be able to change the hearts and minds of buyers. And that's what marketing is about. Like I'll say it one more time. No, revenue shouldn't be the number one goal of marketing. Period.
Then Jorgen, and I'm sorry, Jay. What should be the number one goal of marketing?
Great question. Like as much as I have like ego and like some boldness around like some shit that I believe and don't believe, I'm not going to say that I have the perfect answer to like what is that one thing. And it always, of course, kind of depends too, right? But if you're pushing me, like I think the number one goal is always telling a story that connects.
Yeah.
That's always it. And that doesn't always mean mapping so directly to revenue.
Yeah, I think a few things, right, for Liz's question is it's demand for your product, right? That's really how you measure marketing, in my opinion. That doesn't always show up in a revenue number, especially even right away. Yeah. But marketing's true job, if we're talking about a company that's supposed to drive profits, is to create demand for their product. Mm-hmm. And that does not always align with creating, unfortunately, the revenue era is packaged up as creating demand for sales, honestly. And those are two different games. If you're going to play the long game, they play out differently. But I want to kind of piggyback a little bit on something else too on this, as I think about here. This is not meant to to bash anybody, but this is what I just see when I see all these freaking everybody's posting these pillars and these tenants and this bullshit. And honestly, it just seems like it's a bunch of people doing shit on conjecture right now. It's like a few people get together and they say, well, let's come up with this new thing and what should be a part of this new thing. And there's really nothing behind it, honestly. And this isn't a knock to any, like, Nick seems super smart. There's no diss here, but like, that's kind of how I feel is going on. Like, I look at those 4 pillars. Well, you just described marketing to me. You didn't describe a revenue era.
No.
You just described everything in marketing.
It's like just the general
and called it something
of the
different.
like typical corporate marketing team, right?
Yep. Yeah. And the other thing, so my biggest gripe with this, though, is then people are reading this. Guys, to pull that off, do you know how much that's going to cost to have those 4 pillars at a SaaS company that's 10 to 20 million? You're not going to have enough people to do all that shit. And I think the other thing that I kind of go back to, and I've talked about a few times in this, is it's that lack of focus that really I've realized is such a big damn deal in marketing. Like, because now someone's reading this, they think we're in the revenue era. They're going to try to do all 4 of those things, and then they're going to do all 4 of those other things he talked about, and you're just going to do a lot of mediocre shit. And that's what's going to happen. And that's really what I really want to get at with this post. It's not necessarily knocking maybe even the revenue era. It's everybody kind of coming up with these best practices in a vacuum based on conjecture. And it really kind of misleads a lot of marketing teams, I think, and leaves them in a bad spot.
Yeah, let's pause for a second and zoom in on something that you were getting at there. The enemy needs to be mediocre marketing. Like, for all of us, all of us 3, anybody who foolish enough to listen to us talk about this stuff, even worse, watch us. The enemy should be mediocre marketing, right? And how do you avoid mediocre marketing? Or to start on the other end, what creates it, right?
Yeah.
And what you said, Jay, about lack of focus is one of the biggest issues. Like, in my way too many years to name here because I'm old, years of like doing this kind of shit, I've seen a lack of focus from, the marketing leader, sometimes myself, being too excited about too many things, or the team, finding things that they want to try and you want to leave room for it, or CEO, somebody else from the leadership is like throwing stuff in. If you aren't really, really awake at the wheel, you will be in a situation where you're lacking focus. And one of the pretty immediate outcomes will be mediocre marketing. Like, that's just how it is. What's up, Liz's kids?
Yeah. And I think, you said something, and maybe just because I want to really preface on this podcast really quick, and I'll get back to you, Jurgen, is, by the way, everybody, I didn't realize this focus thing until about 6 months ago, right? This isn't where Jay's been like super, like, literally it has dawned on me in the past 6 months that focus is one of the biggest issues. Even as an agency, we've lacked it for the longest time. For my whole career, I realized this. Yep. Like, it took me that long. And a lot of people don't realize it.
I really think it's focus and it's investment. Because the reality is that to do good marketing, you have to take money and sink it into creating persuasive stories. For some reason, trying to think about an emotional story around data and analytics. I'm like, how would I do that? But at least a persuasive story, right? That's for me, the number one goal of marketing is to persuade somebody that your product is worth looking at or worth buying, right? And in order to do that with people who have spent their life working around these products or doing things the other way, you have to think about, how do I persuade them? How do I create content to do that? And to create really good content, like, it takes a few people. It takes headcount. It takes time, probably away from demand gen. And what people and what companies want you to do is they want to say, hey, here's your pipeline goal. Go point your whole team towards that pipeline goal. Nobody should be focused on doing anything other than demand gen. But the reality is that you're just scaling tactics. And sometimes you find something that works for 6 months and they just want you to continue scaling it for the next 12, right? This persuasion needs to continue. It needs to evolve. It needs to be fresh. And I just think that investment in creating that really, really quality content and quality narrative, just a lot of companies aren't even, it's not even focused. And maybe it is focused, but it's investment to me. Like they will not, no, a lot of companies just miss that part enough where they are not investing in like, in the egg before the chicken. To me, like the chicken is like running away, and it's your demand gen tactics. Your egg is like the foundation. I don't know where I came up with this, but the egg is the foundation of, and you can't have a chicken without the egg. I don't know.
Wow. Wow.
I'm going to say one thing, and I want to pass this to Jurgen because I forgot one point and I wrote it down. You probably can't see it, but the reason we're in the revenue era, Jurgen, you said, right, there's been this push to revenue. I think I realized why. Shit's not working like it used to. That's the real reality. Shit's not working, so everybody's focused on revenue, right?
Yep. And this is maybe a little bit too specific and nerdy and nuanced, but like focusing on revenue isn't necessarily focusing, right? Like,
right.
You focus on your input, not necessarily the outcome. Sure, you can be oriented around an outcome, and so you're going to focus now on the right things. Like kind of, sort of, right? But then you're kind of back to this post. You're throwing, field and events, if we're combining those, demand gen, ABM, like you're throwing all this stuff in to drive revenue faster and more revenue. And really, I don't see the focus in there. I'm sure there's an intention there for focus. And I'm sure that Nick or anybody else who's working on this would say, hey, but like, wait till we reveal the values and blah, blah, blah. And like, I'm sure there's a point there around it, but I think it's a very slippery slope. I couldn't imagine being in a company subscribing to this idea of the revenue era, leading marketing, and doing as much as I can to drive revenue and say that I'm really focused and going deep and actually finding sustainable growth. I just don't think it happens like that.
Yeah.
This shit is too hard. Like what Jay said too, like shit's gotten harder. So, and the gap between those who are absolutely crushing it and everybody else is only widening, right? And this is the reason why we keep having these conversations, because most of the advice, the loudest shit out there is either from companies that are like in hypergrowth mode exploding, or people that want to be associated with that and sort of speaks on the behalf of those, or sort of romanticizes around that stuff. Meanwhile, all these other companies that are just trying to freaking figure it out, trying to grow the right way. I don't think those companies, those teams are going to win by just sort of saying, well, it's the revenue era, so let's follow that stuff.
To me, like what the revenue era, and let me use a better metaphor this time, is that, you're
what animal?
Not animal, but you're renovating your house, right? You're making it beautiful. You're extending your house, but like all of your electricity, all of your foundation is cracked. Your electric systems from the 1960s, right? To me, when I see revenue era, especially put out kind of like this, you're focused on building out when a lot of the core things aren't being maintained, right? And again, I'm not necessarily against revenue era and pipeline. I'm not necessarily against those just as a name or as a marketing metric. I'm kind of against how a lot of people are going at it. It's just extremely tactic based. And I've seen this time and time and time again where teams are completely focused only on tactics and nobody is taking a step back to do those foundational items.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good way to end this too, is what the advice that I'm reading from that as I really dig in is, that's great if you're already at high growth. Yeah, do those things. That seems to make a lot of sense. You have a strong foundation you're building on. It's still, like I said, I think for the most of us, you're just going to spin your wheels and waste a bunch of time, and that's kind of Unfortunate.
It'll only work if you're at one of those companies that's already growing like crazy. It's if you're stalled, it's not going to get you out of a stall.